The desert wind carried dust across the open plains, whispering like old stories that refused to die. She rode alone beneath the fading sun, her hands trembling against the leather reins as the horse pushed forward through the dry evening heat. Her dress, once neat and meant for a promised future, was torn at the hem and stained from miles of silent travel. Behind her lay a small frontier town where everyone thought her life was settled, where she had once believed a wedding ring was waiting. But all of that shattered the moment she learned the truth about the man she had been promised to. She had seen things with her own eyes, not rumors, not whispers. The woman he embraced behind the stable had smiled the same way he once smiled at her. His vows of loyalty, his soft words, his gentle touch, all turned hollow. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. She could not stay, not with the judgmental eyes of the town ladies, not with his apologies chasing her like shadows. So she left, abandoning white flowers, lace, and every dream she once packed for her future. She fled into the wildlands where only the brave or the desperate traveled. She knew nothing about survival out there, but she knew she could no longer breathe beneath the weight of broken promises. The night crept across the sky as she rode farther from town, past old fences and rusted wagon tracks, into land untouched by church bells or street lamps. The frontier stretched wide and unforgiving. Coyotes howled somewhere in the dark, and every rustle in the brush made her heartbeat rise. She had no map, only instinct, and that instinct pushed her toward the distant mesas. Where a faint line of campfire smoke curled into the sky, someone was out there. Someone dangerous. She knew the stories told around fireplaces about warriors who lived beyond the settlements, stories filled with fear and awe. People whispered about raids, about a legendary Apache fighter who never lost a battle and never spared a trespasser. They called him the feared one, the silent one, the one who carried scars like trophies. Some said he was raised on war and storm winds. Others said he walked between the spirit world and the earth, guided by ancestors. Settlers kept their children close when his name was spoken, ranchers locked their doors, and soldiers prayed they would never see him under the burning sun. To her, he was nothing more than a distant legend meant to frighten travelers. But tonight, he was the only light in a land of darkness. Her horse slowed, exhausted, and she slipped to the ground, her legs barely holding her. The smoke was close now. She walked, brushing through sage and dry grass, until she reached an open valley. There, in the center, stood a lone tent made of hide and painted with tribal markings. Skulls, feathers, bones, and beads hung from poles around it, swaying in the wind like silent guardians. Each symbol felt ancient and watchful. She hesitated, shivering from cold and fear. She had run from betrayal but had no idea she would end up at the doorstep of a man the whole frontier feared. She approached slowly, clutching her shawl around her shoulders. The fire outside the tent crackled low, throwing sparks into the night. The smell of smoke mixed with earth and the faint scent of herbs. She whispered to herself, unsure whether she was seeking refuge or welcoming death. Her voice shook as she called out, not knowing if she should speak in a tongue unfamiliar to him or simply pray someone kind would hear. The tent flap lifted, not by her hand but from within. She froze. He stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, his long, dark hair moving with the breeze. Tribal paint carved across his face, framed eyes that burned like embers under the moonlight. A necklace of beads, bone, and metal pieces hung across his chest, each one a story she could not understand. His skin was marked with old scars, not fresh wounds, but memories of battles no one dared retell. He studied her silently, expression hard, almost unreadable. He carried no fear, only presence. Her voice failed at first. She had faced heartbreak, humiliation, and loneliness without breaking. But standing before this man, she felt her knees weaken. She wanted to turn around and run, but there was nowhere left to go. The open land behind her held only cold wind and hungry predators. He looked at her as though he already knew she did not belong there. She finally spoke, her words small, shaky. She said she needed a place to rest for the night. She tried to explain that she meant no harm, that she was simply passing through, but her voice cracked. She said nothing of betrayal, nothing of love gone wrong. That pain lived in her eyes, not her words. He stepped closer, slow and deliberate. The firelight revealed details she had not seen from afar. The marks on his face were not just decoration. They seemed like declarations of identity, maybe even loss. His necklace held charms that looked sacred. The chain wrapped across his shoulder was not metal from settlers, but something hand-forged with meaning older than towns and railroads. He was not wild in the way rumors described. He was something stronger, grounded, fierce. He reached out, not to touch her, but to move her cloak aside just enough to see her torn dress, the dust on her boots, the trail of dried tears she tried to hide. His eyes narrowed as if reading invisible truths. He asked how she got there, but his tone carried neither accusation nor comfort. It was simply a command to speak truth. She opened her mouth, but the words stuck in her throat. She wanted to say she ran from lies. She wanted to say she lost everything. Instead, she whispered that she had nowhere else to go. The wind shifted, carrying silence between them. The world around felt still. The firelight flickered against his sharp features, casting shadows that made him look like a figure carved from ancient stone. He could send her away, leave her to the wolves and cold night. He could turn his back and return to his solitude. Instead, he stood there, studying her like someone deciding whether her life had value, or if she was just another burden from the world beyond his lands. He finally turned his face toward the tent, then back to her, a faint shift in his stance that neither welcomed nor rejected. He stepped aside, just enough for her to understand she could enter. But the way he watched her made one thing clear. She was not a guest. She was someone who had crossed into a place where trust was not easily given and every breath had to be earned. She took one step forward, heart pounding. Another step, then another, until she stood at the opening of the tent. The air inside carried warmth, herbs, and something that felt ancient. She hesitated, knowing once she crossed that line, nothing in her life would ever be the same. Behind her lay betrayal. Before her stood the most feared Apache on the frontier. She lifted the flap and walked inside and outside. He watched with eyes that held both mystery and warning, as if he already knew her story would not end the way she expected. The fire snapped. The wind howled, and somewhere in the darkness, a new fate awakened. The tent felt warmer than she expected, lit by a small clay lamp burning low beside a woven mat. A faint scent of dried sage and smoke hung in the air, as if the place carried memories in every breath. Animal hides were laid out carefully, not thrown or scattered, but arranged with intention, each one telling some unspoken story. She stood still, afraid to touch anything. It felt like stepping into someone's soul, rather than a shelter built from skins and rope. She could hear his footsteps outside, slow and measured. He did not rush to follow her in. It was as if he wanted her to sit with the weight of the choice she just made. Her hands shook as she reached for a fur-lined blanket near the mat, unsure if she was allowed to touch it. Finally, she lowered herself onto the ground, legs too weak to keep carrying the truth that chased her across miles of dust and heartbreak. The night outside settled deeper. The sounds of distant coyotes faded into quiet. The plains no longer felt hostile, but watchful. She wondered if she should speak or remain silent. She wondered if there were rules inside a place like this. The man outside seemed like someone who lived by a code old as the land itself. He entered at last, pushing aside the tent flap with a calm that felt more dangerous than fury. His shadow filled the entrance before his body did. When he stepped inside, the air shifted. He did not sit. He stood over her, his presence heavy but controlled, like a storm deciding whether to break. He asked her name, not with softness, but with the voice of someone who demanded truth as a price for shelter. She told him quietly, though the name felt small now, as if it belonged to someone she used to be. She waited for him to offer his in return, but he said nothing. Instead, he knelt beside the fire pit and placed more wood inside, tending the flames without looking at her. She watched the lines of his back, the tension in his shoulders, the way his muscles moved like coiled strength. He had lived through battles the world never wrote down, battles that carved stories across his skin rather than paper. He finally spoke again, asking why she came so far alone. She wanted to lie to protect her pride, but something in his eyes told her lies would not survive in this place. She explained what happened back in town, choosing her words carefully. She did not describe betrayal in detail. She simply said she had been promised a future, and that future crumbled. His expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened slightly, as if he understood disappointment and deceit well enough to recognize it in others. He asked why she came here instead of seeking refuge with her own people. She swallowed hard. She said she could not bear their pity nor their whispers. She said that out here she was free, even if that freedom meant fear and uncertainty. He finally looked at her directly, and for a moment she felt seen rather than judged. Then he stood again and stepped outside without another word. She sat in silence, unsure if she had been accepted or merely tolerated. Her heartbeat refused to settle. Hours passed slow. She thought about the life she left behind, the dress she once hoped to wear, the man who broke his vows before even taking them. She wondered if he searched for her or if he moved on without guilt. Outside, the warrior stood beneath the moon, staring into the open desert, as if listening for spirits carried on the wind. He did not fear the night because the land did not threaten him. It belonged to him. Or perhaps he belonged to it. She watched him through a small gap in the tent and saw a man who carried loneliness the way others carried pride. Thick chains crossed his torso, some carved from bone, others metal. They were not decorations. They looked like reminders of promises kept or debts still unpaid. She wondered about his past. People in town said men like him lived only for war, for strength, for revenge. They never spoke about loss, love, or reasons that shaped a person into legend. She realized how little she truly knew about the world beyond her narrow life. He returned later, carrying a clay bowl filled with water and herbs. He placed it in front of her and motioned for her to wash. The gesture felt unexpectedly human. She dipped her hands into the warm liquid, the herbs releasing a calming scent. She wiped the dust from her face and the dried tears she hoped he had not noticed. When she finished, he took the bowl silently and poured the water outside. She whispered a thank you, barely loud enough to carry. He paused, glanced at her again, then sat across the tent with his back against the hide wall. He did not sleep. He watched the entrance, like a guardian waiting for danger. She realized he was not protecting her from him, but from the land outside. Or perhaps from others who walked under the same moon. The night stretched on. She rested but did not sleep deeply. Each time she opened her eyes, he was still awake. She wondered if he ever slept, or if his life had taught him rest was a luxury he no longer trusted. When dawn approached, the first light seeped through the hides. She sat up slowly, her body sore from travel. The warrior finally stood, stepping outside to greet the morning in silence. She followed, stopping at the entrance. The land looked different now. In daylight, the valley seemed vast and beautiful rather than threatening. Tall cliffs rose like guardians, and dry grass shimmered in the golden sun. She felt small but alive. He began preparing his horse, a powerful chestnut with braided mane and painted markings. She asked where he was going, wondering if he expected her to leave already. He said he had business beyond the ridge. His voice held finality, not invitation. She asked if she should leave. He turned to her, expression unreadable, and said she could stay for now. The words did not sound like kindness. They sounded like terms of a temporary truce. She nodded, though she could feel uncertainty settling heavy around her. Once he mounted his horse, something unexpected happened. A distant horn echoed across the plains, low and ominous. He froze, posture tense, eyes narrowing toward the sound. It was not a settler horn. It was something tribal, something that called warriors to action. She watched a change in him, like an old wound reopened. Without a word, he rode off fast, dust rising behind him. She stood there, the tent and valley suddenly feeling too large and too quiet. She realized she was alone again, but this time surrounded by a world she did not understand. She wondered who had blown the horn and whether it meant danger for him or for her. She turned to look inside the tent and noticed something she had not seen before, hidden beneath a folded pelt. A bundle wrapped in cloth, marked with beads and symbols, as if holding something sacred. She reached toward it, but stopped her hand midair, heart pounding. She sensed that whatever lay inside was not meant for strangers. She stepped back, not touching it, but the question lingered. What was this man protecting? What history followed him like a shadow? The sun climbed higher, warming the ground. Hours passed with nothing but wind and silence. She sat outside by the fire, staring at the path he took. She did not know if he would return by nightfall, or if he would return at all. Yet deep down, something pulled her to stay, as if fate had led her here for more than escape. She knew she could not go back to her town, not after choosing this path. The thought frightened her. But the unknown future also felt strangely alive. She wrapped her shawl tighter and looked toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, the feared Apache rode toward something that called to him, and she waited in the quiet valley, knowing this was only the beginning of whatever story they had stepped into together. The hours stretched long in the valley. By midday, the sun burned high, and heat shimmered above the sand. She tried to stay busy, because sitting still made her mind return to the town, to the church she had once pictured, to the man who promised her a gentle future and handed her something else instead. The betrayal still cut sharp, but now a new worry crawled in beside it. She had taken refuge in the tent of the most feared Apache warrior, and he had ridden away toward a horn she did not recognize. She had no idea what that call meant, or whether he would be the same man when he returned. She walked a slow circle around the camp, careful not to disturb anything. Spears rested against a large rock, their points chipped from use, but carefully tended. A bow hung from a wooden frame, its string tight and ready. The bones and beads that circled the camp moved with the breeze, their soft clicking like quiet warnings. She realized every object here had a purpose. Nothing was careless. Inside the tent, the bundle she had seen earlier waited in the same place. It pulled at her thoughts like a loose thread. She had not touched it, but every time she glanced at it, questions rose. Was it a weapon, a sacred object, a memory he refused to let go of? Curiosity wrestled with respect. Respect kept winning by a small margin. She finally sat by the fire pit and tried to steady herself. She thought of her former fiancé, of the way he had leaned close and whispered about the house he planned to build, the cattle he wanted to buy, the future children he imagined. He had painted a picture of safety, of a life fenced in and orderly. Yet behind the stable, with his arms around another woman, he had spoken the same words all over again. That was when she realized some men loved the sound of their own promises more than the people they gave them to, deep inside. Another truth troubled her. The Apache warrior had given her no promises at all, only silence, shelter, and guarded eyes. Somehow that felt more honest. As the sun dipped downward, a shadow moved along the ridge. She tensed, heart thudding, but it was not him. A younger rider appeared, lean and sharp, riding a paint horse. Feathers tied to his hair fluttered in the wind. He saw her near the fire and halted, his hand falling to the knife at his waist. They stared at each other in a still moment that felt like a test. He dismounted with a quick, fluid motion. His expression showed open suspicion. He spoke words in his own language first, fast and questioning. She did not understand. He switched to broken frontier tongue, asking where the warrior was and why a settler woman sat at his fire. She rose slowly, palms open to show she held no weapon. She explained that the warrior had allowed her to stay. She used the word allowed rather than invited because she knew the difference. The young Apache looked unconvinced. He stepped around her, inspected the tent, the fire pit, the tracks in the dust. When he noticed the bundle under the pelt, his jaw tightened. She saw respect in his eyes now, mixed with irritation. Whatever that bundle meant, it was important. He turned back to her and asked if she had touched it. She shook her head quickly. The last thing she wanted was to offend the very people keeping the land from swallowing her whole. After a long breath, he nodded once, As if deciding he believed her, he said the warrior had gone to the council. The warning horn, he explained, had called the men of his people together. Settlers had crossed a line, bringing soldiers near water that belonged to the Apache long before anyone laid fences there. Voices were rising. Old grudges were stirring under new insults. The feared warrior, he said, stood at the heart of that storm. At last all eyes turned to the feared warrior. His opinion mattered not just because he commanded respect in battle, but because he rarely spoke unless his words carried weight. He thought of the woman in his tent, of her dusty boots, and the way she had clutched her shawl like armor, remembered how she shook, yet refused to lie. Keeping her meant standing against a story already spreading through town, but sending her back would stain his own sense of honor. In his world, a person under his shelter was under his protection. He finally said that if soldiers came for her, they would not stop there. They would use her as a reason to step further into Apache land. The true conflict was not about one woman or one settler. It was about power, about who controlled the rivers, the grazing valleys, the hunting trails. The elders knew he was right. They agreed on one thing only. The valley where his tent stood would be watched. Scouts would ride the edges, eyes sharp for dust, clouds of riders from town. The warrior would return to the woman, but he would not return alone in spirit. The weight of his people's future would ride back with him. As he left the council fire, a young scout approached and told him the same thing he had told the woman. Some in the tribe were uneasy about a settler sharing his shelter. Old wounds from past raids had not healed. Children and elders lost to sickness brought by outsiders still lingered in memory. The warrior nodded, accepting the burden. It was not the first time his choices had stood between clans in conflict. Back in the valley, shadows grew long. The woman gathered kindling and fed the fire, trying to keep her mind from racing. She thought of the young Apache's warning. She could feel the invisible lines that divided their worlds, lines she had crossed without understanding them. For the first time, she wondered whether her presence here put him at risk as much as it placed her in his hands. She stepped inside the tent again, drawn once more to the wrapped bundle. This time, the pull was stronger. If she was at the center of some conflict she did not understand, she wanted at least one answer. She knelt beside it, heart drumming. Her fingers hovered an inch above the cloth. She could almost hear his deep voice warning her off, though he was miles away. Before she could decide, a far-off sound reached her, steady thunder of many hooves against dry ground. She stiffened and rushed outside. On the horizon, near the opening of the valley, a faint line of dust rose. Many riders were coming fast. She could not tell if they were Apache scouts or soldiers or townsmen led by the man she had fled. All she knew was that they were heading straight for the place where she stood alone, under the weak protection of a fire and a tent that did not truly belong to her. Her gaze darted to the weapons resting by the rock. The bow, the spears, the knife. She had never fired an arrow in her life. Her hand trembled as she reached toward them, torn between respect for what was not hers and fear of what approached. The line of riders grew clearer with each passing breath, and in that rising tension, the quiet valley felt ready to split open. The riders drew closer, a dark string across the light of the valley mouth. Dust climbed above them like a warning. Her breath came faster as she shaded her eyes with one hand, trying to see who they were. For a moment her mind went to the worst place. She pictured soldiers with polished guns and sharp orders, led by the very man who had called himself her future. She tasted dry fear on her tongue. Her fingers brushed the wooden shaft of one of the spears before she snatched her hand back, remembering whose weapons those were. The first shapes became clear. Not uniforms, not long blue coats. These men rode bareheaded or with feathers in their hair, their chests painted, braids tied with strips of leather, Apache riders. Her knees wobbled with a mix of relief and new dread. She was under their protection, but also under their judgment. They fanned into the valley with the easy grace of men who knew every stone and cactus. The leader, an older man with a strong jaw and gray at his temples, guided his horse to a stop only a few strides from her. He looked down at her with eyes that had seen many winters and many broken agreements. He spoke first in his own language to the others, then turned his attention to her. He asked where the feared warrior was. His tone carried authority, not curiosity. She swallowed and told him he had gone to the council at the horn's call. That answer did not surprise him. He nodded, then asked why she was there, alone in the warriors' camp. She repeated what she had already told the younger rider earlier, but this time she let more of the hurt bleed into her words. She told them she had fled a faithless man and found shelter only because their warrior had allowed it. Her voice shook when she spoke of betrayal. Some of the younger men exchanged glances, but the elder kept his gaze on her face, searching, weighing. He asked if she understood that soldiers in town believed she had been taken against her will.
But that her stomach twisted.
She said clearly that no one had taken her. She had chosen to ride away. If soldiers said otherwise, they lied. Her hands clenched at her sides as she spoke. She might have been frightened, but she would not be silent about that truth. For a long moment, no one spoke. The riders listened to the wind, the horses snorting softly. Finally, the elder said that settlers rarely listened to the words of Apache people, and even less to a woman who stood on their side. Soldiers would come because they wanted a reason. Land and power hid under the excuse of a missing bride. Her heart sank. The valley, with its tent and quiet fire, suddenly felt like tinder waiting for a spark. He ordered 2 of the younger men to ride back out and watch the approaches. One took the ridge to the east, the other rode toward the main trail that led from town. The remaining riders dismounted and spread out around the camp, checking signs, studying tracks, making sure no one had followed her already. She watched them move with purpose, their calm efficiency reminding her that they had lived with danger far longer than she had. The elder finally asked if she would stand by her words if soldiers rode in, rifles raised. She hesitated only a moment. Then she said yes. She would tell anyone who asked that she had come of her own will, that the feared Apache had done nothing but offer shelter. Her voice was soft but steady this time. He studied her again, then gave a short nod of respect she had not expected. As the afternoon wore on, the sky began to dim with thin clouds drifting in from the west. Shadows lengthened across the valley, turning it into a shallow bowl of gold and gray. The riders grew more tense as the light faded. Every distant sound made them glance toward the ridges. She could feel the air thick with expectation. Somewhere beyond the hills, men were making plans that would crash together in this quiet place. When the feared warrior finally returned, he came like a storm held tightly in the reins. His horse thundered down from the ridge, mane tossed, breath steaming in short bursts. He swung from the saddle before it even stopped moving, his eyes taking in the gathered riders, the elder, and then her. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the look in his eyes. There was no relief in them, only calculation and a low, burning anger he hid from the others. The elder met him halfway, and the 2 men spoke in low voices. She could not understand the words, but she watched their expressions. The elder's face was grave, the warrior's rigid. At one point, the elder gestured to her, and the warrior's gaze flicked toward her again, sharper this time. She felt as though she had become a piece in a game played long before she had ever walked into it. After a long exchange, the elder turned away to address the other riders, while the warrior approached her. He stood close enough that she could see the fine dust clinging to his hair and the faint sheen of sweat on his skin. He told her straight that soldiers were likely already riding this way, led by the man she had left. Her throat tightened. He said they claimed she was stolen, and that her presence here might bring war if things were not handled carefully. He asked her, in a voice low but intense, if she truly wanted to remain under his protection. This was not a question meant to flatter her. It was a hard choice he laid at her feet. If she left now, perhaps taken halfway back to Wardtown, some bargain might be struck. If she stayed, she would stand in the middle of whatever came, with no turning back. She looked at the valley, the riders, the tent that had kept her warm, and then thought of the man who had kissed another woman behind the stable. She realized she could not return to him and still respect herself. She lifted her chin and told the warrior she would stay. Her voice was soft, but the decision in it was real. For a moment, his expression shifted. The hard lines eased, just a fraction, as if he saw unexpected strength in her. Then the hardness returned. He nodded once and said that, from that moment, her place in this valley was no accident. It was a stand. Scouts raced in as the sun sank low, bringing word that dust trails had been spotted in the distance from the direction of town. Not many riders yet, but enough to trouble them. The elder ordered the camp arranged for defense. Men took up positions along the rocks, bows and rifles ready, each knowing where to move if lines were crossed. The warrior walked among them, giving no loud orders, only quiet words and gestures. This was not a raid. It felt like something heavier, where one wrong move could open years of blood. He returned to her side and placed a small knife in her hand. It was not meant to send her into battle. He said it was for protection if things went badly inside the camp. The weight of the knife in her palm felt heavier than iron. She slipped it into her belt, heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She had never held a weapon with true intent before. Evening slipped into that strange hour between day and night. The sky glowed orange near the horizon and deep blue overhead. The riders from town appeared at last on the far side of the valley. They came in a tight cluster, led by 2 soldiers in uniform and a man she recognized from miles away. The tilt of his shoulders, the way he held his reins too tight, the fancy coat he always wore when he wanted to impress people. Her former fiancé, seeing him there, flanked by soldiers, twisted something inside her that hurt in a new way. This was not a man ashamed of what he had done. This was a man who turned his own betrayal into a weapon, using her as a story to gain help. The soldiers paused at the mouth of the valley as they spotted the Apache riders watching from the rocks and open ground. The air seemed to crackle between the 2 groups. The elder stepped forward first, mounted and tall, his face calm. The feared warrior rode beside him, expression carved from stone. They did not raise their weapons. They simply waited. After a tense pause, the lead soldier urged his horse forward, followed by the man she once thought she loved. They advanced into the valley with caution, eyes flicking over the number of riders and the lay of the land. She stood near the tent, hands clasped tight, the knife a small weight at her waist. She knew they could see her, a lone figure among those the town labeled as dangerous. Her former fiancé's face shifted when he recognized her. First came surprise, then something like relief, and finally calculation. He called out her name, voice ringing across the valley, asking if she was hurt, if she had been forced to stay. Every eye turned toward her. The Apache riders watched to see what she would say. The soldiers waited, fingers close to the triggers of their rifles. The man in the fine coat stared at her with a pleading look he had practiced many times before. The look that always used to soften her resolve. The feared warrior looked back at her once, his dark gaze steady and intense. In that glance, she understood everything. The peace of this valley, the safety of these people, and the truth of her own heart hung on the words that would come out of her mouth next. If she faltered, soldiers would call it proof. If she lied to spare him, she would betray the man who had given her shelter and the people now standing between her and danger. The wind stirred, tugging at her hair and shawl, carrying the smell of dust and sweat and tension. The horses shifted their weight. A crow cried somewhere high above, then silence dropped again. She took a step forward, away from the tent, away from the small safety of its shadow. Her boots scuffed the packed earth as she moved toward the open space between the 2 groups of riders. Her heart hammered so hard she wondered if everyone could hear it. Both sides watched her with the same sharp attention. She stopped halfway, feeling the weight of 2 worlds pressing on her from either side. The former fiancé called out to her again, his voice sweeter this time, asking her to come back and let the soldiers escort her home. Behind her, the warrior's presence felt like a steady wall, silent but fierce. She drew a deep breath, the cool evening air filling her lungs. This was the moment when truths would either save lives or break them apart. Her lips parted as she began to answer, her voice ready to carry across the valley and choose once and for all where she belonged. She stood alone. Between both sides, heart thudding like hooves on hard ground, the former fiancé leaned forward on his saddle, reaching his hand toward her as if he believed she would simply return to him without question. The soldiers stayed close behind him, rifles lowered but ready. The Apache riders behind her watched in stillness, bows drawn but not raised, prepared for whatever truth unfolded. She took another step forward, steadying her voice. She said she had not been taken, that no one forced her to cross the plains or enter the feared warrior's tent. She said she left because trust had been broken back in town, and she would not live under lies. The words echoed across the valley, strong enough for every rider to hear. The soldier leading the column narrowed his eyes and asked if she understood the consequences of choosing her own path. She answered that she understood more than before, and that she would not return with people who wanted to twist her life into a claim over land. Her former fiancé tried again, his voice softer, promising to change, promising a new start and a better life. She looked at him long enough to remember who she used to be, then shook her head. She told him a life built on weakness would always fall when storms came, and she was done holding up a future alone. His face dropped, pride crumbling in front of soldiers who had marched here believing they were acting on justice. The feared warrior rode forward then, slow and deliberate, making sure every movement showed he sought no fight. The elder matched his pace. They stopped at her side, flanking her like walls that would not fall easily. The warrior spoke to the soldiers first, saying they had been fed lies to pull them into a private matter dressed as a rescue. He said their presence in the valley threatened peace, not because of one woman, but because of the long trail of broken promises that followed them. His voice did not rise, but each word carried weight. The lead soldier, seeing no frightened hostage and no proof of wrongdoing, hesitated. He looked between the woman, the feared warrior, and the elder. He finally asked her if she wanted to stay on Apache land. She felt the wind push against her dress, the scent of sage rising from the ground, the sound of calm horses breathing behind her. She nodded and said she would stay for now, until she found her own direction. She added that where she stood was not captivity, but choice. The soldiers shifted uncomfortably. The man she left stared at the ground, unable to fight the truth spoken aloud. He tried to argue once more, but his voice cracked under the weight of eyes watching. The elder lifted his chin and said the matter was done. The soldiers had no reason to pursue further. They could return to town and keep their war out of this land. After a long pause, the officer agreed. He signaled his men, and the horses turned, carrying disappointment and dust, back toward the horizon. The former fiancés lingered at the edge of the valley, looking back at her. He tried once more to speak, but no words came. She gave him a quiet nod, not of love, but of closure. Then he rode away without looking back. When the dust settled and the last echo of hooves faded, the valley breathed again. The elder turned to her, studying her as if seeing her for the first time, not as intruder or burden, but as a soul with her own scars. He told her she had spoken with courage. Some riders nodded toward her with newfound respect. The younger warriors relaxed their bows, letting the tension melt back into the evening air. The feared warrior dismounted and stood beside her. For a while they said nothing. The silence felt different now, not sharp or uncertain, but steady. She finally asked what would happen next. He said that staying here meant walking a harder path than any town could offer, one where respect was earned slowly and danger lived close to the earth. She said she understood, and that she did not choose this valley because it was safe. She chose it because she wanted a place where truth meant something. The elder and the other riders departed one by one as the sky deepened into night, leaving the valley quiet again. Only the warrior stayed. He walked toward the fire pit and rekindled the flames with practiced ease. She sat beside him on the ground. They faced the fire, letting the warmth wrap around them. Unlike before, the quiet did not feel heavy. It felt like a place where new stories could begin. Later, when the stars came out like scattered sparks, he finally spoke about the bundle inside the tent. He motioned for her to follow. She knelt beside him as he unwrapped the cloth. Inside lay small carved figures, feathers bound by leather, and a piece of metal shaped into a charm. He said they belonged to someone he had lost long ago, a woman he once protected until sickness took her. He kept those memories not as chains but as reminders. For the first time, she understood that his strength was not born from war, but from grief carried with dignity. She told him she did not come to replace anyone. She came because she needed a place to stand and breathe. He nodded as though he respected that answer. Over the next days, she helped gather wood, learned to grind herbs into medicine, and listened to stories told by the young riders who returned to watch over the valley. The warrior taught her how to read the wind for signs of riders, how to move quietly through brush, how to stand without fear. They spoke little, but the words that passed between them mattered. In time, her heart steadied. The valley became more than refuge. It became home. It's not a home built from lace and promises behind stable doors, but one built from strength, honesty, and quiet respect. She grew closer to the warrior not through rushed vows or desperate need, but through shared work and long evenings beside the fire. Days turned into weeks, and the valley remained peaceful. Soldiers did not return. The man she left behind faded into memory. Another chapter closed. The Apache riders began to greet her with familiar smiles, offering her painted beads or small pieces of food from their hunts. She earned her place there slowly, and each new day wrote a story she never planned to live. One night, as the wind carried the scent of rain across the plains, the warriors stood beside her at the ridge. Below them stretched the land, wild and open, glowing under moonlight. She whispered that sometimes the most feared places turned out to be the safest. He looked at her, his eyes softer than she had ever seen, and said that sometimes the lost find what they never knew they needed. She smiled, not as a woman escaped from heartbreak, but as someone who finally understood her own worth. The valley, once filled with tension and danger, now felt like a promise waiting to grow. She slipped her hand into his, not demanding anything, just sharing the moment. He held her hand in return, quiet and steady, as the first drops of rain touched the earth around them. And in that quiet night, surrounded by the land that shaped both of them, she found peace in the place where fear once lived, and love in the heart of a man the world misunderstood. Their story did not begin with vows or end with war. It settled into the land like roots in soft soil, honest, strong, and unbreakable. The plains stretched far, the future open, and the woman who once fled betrayal finally walked forward with strength. Beside the warrior who walked the world with quiet fire,